Welcome back to another edition of the Boxscore Geek Show. I'm your host, Dre Alvarez, and this week we're going to be talking lost greatness in Mark Eaton, the amazing Denver Nuggets in the NBA playoffs, and internet drama. So par for the course. As mentioned, I'm your host, Dre Alvarez, found most places as Nerd Numbers. With me, as always, is my producer, voice of God, man of many hats, Brian Foster. Say hey, Brian.
Yeah, what's going on? We're just starting the second round of the playoffs now, so we're going to go through the numbers on those first 8 playoff games in the first round. And yeah, great time of year to be an NBA fan. That's all I can say.
Yeah, so we have two kind of big topics that are non-playoff specific related I want to talk. Then we'll just go over the playoffs, have a couple shout outs, and that'll be our show. So the big topic, and this was really rough and actually spurred me to write an article over at nerdnumbers.substack.com, was on Mark Eaton. We lost Mark Eaton 2 weeks ago. I will throw out, we did not have a show last week for good reason, Brian. A little bit of silver lining, which basically is you didn't want to record a couple of shows because the Nuggets games were on, and on the other days I was busy. So, it was a confluence of events. I've said this before. I refuse to be a basketball podcast that interferes with any of us watching basketball. At the same time, life gets in the way. Good news though, Brian, is the 2 times you were like, hey, do we really want to go tonight? The Nuggets are on. They won. So I kind of said after that, if you ever want to cancel a show for a Nuggets game, you have carte blanche, because Nuggets are in the second round, which in my opinion is more than I expected this season, given all the health. We'll get to that when we get to the playoffs. But the rough news is we lost Mark Eaton unexpectedly, and I wrote an article on him. Staying on a slant that I had already started at my Substack writing, and something that's been on the Box Score Geeks Wages of Wins kind of back burner forever, which is just the absolute snubbage to all-time defensive greats. It's one of my pet peeves, Brian. How often, defense wins championships comes up, or when you look at players like James Harden and Nikola Jokic, two players that we do think are great, we think are MVP quality. Uh, you know, at this point, Brian, keep dipping into that playoff stuff, but at this point, if you didn't vote Nikola Jokic top 3 on your MVP list this season, I have no respect for you as a basketball pundit. And to anybody like idiots such as Nick Wright, who are kind of going, Nikola Jokic, what did he say? He said something like he'd be the worst MVP candidate in 25 years. For by the way, kind of kayfabe reasons, we've noted this, right? Your job as a sports pundit isn't to say intelligent things; it's to get eyeballs, and so he's clearly going for that, because that statement was bullshit from the get-go. If you look at Nikola Jokic compared to Michael Jordan at their respective age, I pointed this out. Nikola Jokic this year is going to have had more playoff games than Michael Jordan at their respective ages. And it's worth noting there's kind of an interesting trade-off, which is Michael Jordan started later because of college. And, of course, went further in the playoffs. But Michael Jordan also, and then, of course, the first round of the playoffs for Michael Jordan's era was best of 5. Michael Jordan also got into the playoffs 2 times with a losing record, so it kind of evens out in my opinion. But Nikola Jokic has been phenomenal in the playoffs. So anybody that kind of bashed him, has no real leg to stand on. And like I said, the one dig people will take against him is like, well, he's not really good at defense. Which, first off, I disagree with when you look at things like his rebounds. Right? If he was really a sieve on defense, or really wasn't a good team player on defense, how does he get the rebound, right? Like you've got to be in front of your guy to get the rebound on defense. So what's happening there? But the easy counter to that other point of people saying, well, we're talking about, lockdown defenders like Tyson Chandler or Mark Eaton, who I'm about to bring up. And those players are snubbed. Mark Eaton is a 2-time defensive player of the year winner, 5-time all D. He only made one all-star game. But those other accolades for me are sufficient. I kind of brought this up in the article about Mark Eaton, noting that it's somewhat hard to do holistic measurements for the Hall of Fame with players like Mark Eaton. And I brought up his kind of career trajectory because if you have a player such as Andrew Wiggins or even Kevin Durant, Kevin Durant was a horrible rookie, but Kevin Durant is a highly touted prospect from high school on. Is going to get drafted really early, both in terms of place in the draft as well as age. Right, he's a one and done player. They're going to get playing time immediately. And so a weird example, right, is Kevin Durant when he finishes is going to have 30,000 plus points scored. I would be willing to bet there are like 6 players like that. So I think Kevin Durant will probably hit 25,000 at least, probably get up to 30,000, provided he stays healthy. Um, he gets to include a horrible rookie season where he scored like 2 to 3,000 points that were terrible. A defensive player like Mark Eaton and the players that I had already written about at Boxscore Geeks, Ben Wallace, because I wrote about Ben Wallace and Chris Webber. Chris Webber is snubbed because the NBA is cowardly in regards to the NCAA, which is unforgivable, and so are sports pundits. Basically, Chris Webber didn't make the Hall of Fame earlier in his career because they didn't want to ruffle any feathers with the NCAA. And, to all the sports writers and voters that acted that way, you're wrong. And history will hopefully judge you for that. I will, for certain. But Ben Wallace, right, is this amazing defensive player. And Ben Wallace, by the way, he's an easy one, right? All of the accolades just say you don't need anything else. Mark Eaton is the one where I kind of said, well, he's borderline. What I ended up doing for Mark Eaton was the Bricado Prime. Bricado Prime, as we bring up, a concept came up with by James Bricado, which is you look at a player, you look for their 6 best seasons, and that kind of gives you an indication of their ceiling. Mark Eaton's 6 best seasons, he averaged between 50 and 60 wins and was 0.175 wins produced per 48. If you listen to the show for a while, Brian and I have our 2 respective metrics. I don't think they were ever official, Brian. I've just kind of come to know them in the nomenclature, which is when you look at a team, you look for a 200 wins produced player per 48. And what you're basically saying is, rightfully so, by the way, Brian, if you want a chance at a title, you need at least one player, probably 2, at least twice as good as an average player in your squad. And this is very much just kind of a diminishing returns thing. It's kind of going, if you don't have 2 players at that level, there is not enough time for your team to catch up with a team that does have a star like that, right? Like in Moneyball, that was a funny concept, which is they lost Jason Giambi. And they kind of said, okay, well, we can't replace Jason Giambi with one player, but can we pick up 3 or 4 batters that between their place in the order can make up the RBIs? I can get a leadoff hitter that gets walked a few more times than the average leadoff hitter. I can get an 8th batter that gets a few more hits, few more RBIs than an average 8th batter. You can do that in the NBA and in baseball, not the NBA. And by the way, for those that actually want to subscribe to my Substack, I'm working on a project possible book idea where I'm looking at basically all of the star trades in NBA history and why they don't work out. And my premise is you really just can't make up star production in the NBA. Exactly what I'm saying right here. Why you need a Brian star to compete. And I actually had a sample chapter where I discussed the difference between basketball and all the other sports. And baseball has a lot of problems in regards to why a star is not enough and like why you can replace Jason Giambi with 3 or 4 players. And one of the reasons is in baseball, the rules basically say for a normal player, non-pitcher, on offense, you get 1/9 of the offense. And on defense, you get, roughly 1/10 of the field at most, right? Because there are 8 fielders, right? So it's like you have to stay by first base. You have to stay by second base. No such luck in basketball, right? James Harden could essentially be considered the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and in some games 6th hitter on offense. And then on defense, it is also perfectly legitimate, right? Like you could, in theory, have Russell Westbrook be the pitcher and then say, actually, for this next play, we want you to be the shortstop. And for this next play, we want you to be in the outfield. That metaphor, actually, I'm liking it, Brian, because in basketball, I will say you are limited on what you can do on defense, and that's because teams can control you. There was this interesting article on Kawhi Leonard, I believe by Matt Moore, where he said what some teams were doing was putting Kawhi on an island. I think this is like a football term, if I'm not mistaken. This is kind of what
Yep.
happens sometimes in football offenses,
Mm-hmm.
which is you isolate a really good defender, like a good cornerback. You basically have a wide receiver that is too good for that cornerback to ignore. You send them out there and you basically say, okay, we're not gonna we're not gonna be able to throw to that wide receiver, but that cornerback is now away from the action. So now are there other defenders good enough? And I think in basketball that's similar. The difference, as I kind of mentioned, in basketball you can do whatever you want, right? On defense there's no rule that says I have to defend this one player. You're allowed to switch, so that's slightly different, but you are still limited in how much you can do on defense. But basically in basketball you can't compete with other team stars if you don't have a star of your own. You just run out of time, you run out of minutes. Baseball, you can, because the stars are limited in terms of how much they can do. Same with football. In the same chapter, I noted on football, you only play half the game on offense or defense. In hockey, the players that play the most minutes still don't play half the game. Whereas in basketball, a star player like James Harden, like Kevin Durant, can play most of the game. Wilt Chamberlain once played all 48 minutes of every game and some overtime, so he averaged over 48 minutes a game. I don't know if it'll come in organically this on the show list, Brian, although I'm sure we'll talk at some of the playoffs, but something that Arturo Galletti, one of the best analysts, has been talking about for years, and it's really showing up in this damn playoffs, Brian, is teams that don't play their stars enough in the playoffs. The good coaches realize it's the playoffs. We've got nothing. There is no tomorrow if we lose potentially. So play your players 40 minutes a night. And there are some coaches, including some great ones like Greg Popovich and Coach Bud or Bood, take your pick. Medicine time for my cat is what that alarm was. Not going to get it out, Brian. I'm jealous of other podcasts that do that. But anyway, even some great coaches don't seem to realize in the playoffs, hey, you can't limit your star players minutes because the other team isn't necessarily going to. So you just have to have a player of that caliber. What I would say is Ben Wallace easily fit that. Mark Eaton did not. And the issue with Mark Eaton, though, was I just kind of mentioned, star players get played immediately. If you are a defensive player like Mark Eaton, Ben Wallace, it takes you a while to basically get a role on a team where they're comfortable giving you starters minutes. Mark Eaton did not start playing as a legitimate NBA starter until he was 28 years old. If he was a traditional one and done player, or even back in the era he played in, 2 or 3 years in school, right? I think Michael Jordan came out after being a junior. Magic Johnson came out after being a sophomore, I recall. He would have started playing at age 20 and getting 30 plus minutes a night if he was a traditional basketball player. He was actually encouraged by Wilt Chamberlain. It turned out Wilt Chamberlain, I'm assuming from being at the Lakers at the time, would hang out near UCLA. And Mark Eaton went to school at UCLA. I remember finding it out before, Brian, and being like, oh, wow, that's just UCLA is such a dominant college in terms of some of the top stars, right? Obviously, Kareem's the big one. I just mentioned Mark Eaton. Is it Russell Westbrook and Kevin Love?
Yeah, they were there at the same time.
That's ridiculous. Any other names I'm missing? I know you know college a little better than I do.
Well, if you go back to that Love and Westbrook team, they also had Aaron Aflalo, who played for a long time in the NBA. They had the point guard who played on Indiana for a long time that we like. I'm forgetting his name now. But yeah, they had like four. No, they had like four NBA players on that team, maybe more. So that was a really good UCLA team.
Yeah, okay, yeah, ridiculous. So I when I saw that Mark Eaton went to UCLA, I was like, wow, ridiculous. But then when I looked up his numbers, he didn't get a ton of minutes because he's not a traditional player. And in fact, the numbers back this. If you look at his numbers in the NBA, dude could not score. Was so.
Yep.
It is so sad to see a center with a true shooting percentage below 50% at any point in NBA history. Let alone the 80s, right, when Kareem was scoring 66 to 70, somewhere in that range. So he was not an offensive player, so he didn't get playing time at UCLA. And Wilt Chamberlain actually told him, according at least to the Wikipedia article, hey, you need to focus on what you're good at, which is namely rebound, blocking, and passing, to other guards. He took it to heart. He lucked out in that he was 7'4". So in two drafts in both. I forget the first draft, but he was drafted by the Phoenix Suns while he was at a community college or a junior college. He decided to transfer to UCLA instead. And then after UCLA, where he didn't really get any playing time, he was still drafted by the Jazz, basically going, hey, you're really, really tall. Let's give you a shot. And was amazing. He was amazing despite being horrible at offense. And I think he belongs in the Hall of Fame. And even using some of the metrics we like, I kind of, what I ended up settling on was the Bricado Prime Plus, where I say, if you have a good enough Bricado Prime with something else to justify you, this was the same reasoning. Oh, sorry about that ambient.
All right. Well, I'll answer the Hall of Fame question. It is really borderline, I think. If you do look at those top 6 seasons, they're pretty solid, but the rest of them are not, and those seem like outliers to me. So I'm usually one of these put everyone in the Hall of Fame people, and sure, Mark Eaton can go in, but I'm a little more that on the side of he shouldn't be in, and that's also because I remember seeing him play. Like he was really bad on offense, like you said. And
by the way, I'm gonna attempt to. We may have to edit because my mic cut out. And I heard the ambient stuff, so I'm gonna kind of do a.
Oh no, we're fine. Let's just keep going. Just keep going.
But okay, so just I'm trying to get this organic. What I was gonna say is, I brought up the Bricado Prime Plus and said he was borderline on his Bricado Prime. I'm very curious about your point on him possibly not belonging in. The reason I give him the pass is the same reason as Chris Webber, which is basically going, if you hit certain accolades, I'm okay basically saying as long as you had a reasonable career, you're in. And so an easy example, by the way, is Finals MVP, a fun comparable. I'm curious about this. I know this has come up before, Brian. Thoughts on Tony Parker in the Hall of
Fame? I would have to do some research, but my okay, I'll just say yes because of his international career combined with all those NBA championships. To me, that's enough. And individually, he was good as well. So
yeah, and to that point, that what I'll throw out is, I would say individually, Tony Parker is not as good as some other players we would easily let in the Hall of Fame, but he's a Finals MVP. So basically, I just go, if you win Finals MVP and have a good enough career, you should be in the Hall of Fame.
Conversely, the Jazz never won the Finals during Mark Eaton's career, and also I don't think Mark Eaton had an international career either.
Yeah, but so and I actually love your point, because here's what gets funny on Mark Eaton to me. The reason he doesn't have the cumulative wins produced we would like is twofold. One is he was injured. He was injured after his 36th season. I mean, he was on the decline anyway, but he probably, without the injury, had 2 or 3 more reasonable seasons left in him, which would have gotten him over 100 wins produced, which would have put him in for me. But additionally, like I just mentioned, he didn't really get starters minutes till he was 28. And even if you look at when he was being played as a starter, it wasn't like Karl Malone, who was getting 40 plus minutes a night in some occasions. Mark Eaton basically hovered around 30 minutes a night. So what gets fascinating to me, when we're looking at just kind of the box score numbers, which we're huge fans of around here, is he didn't get played because he wasn't a traditional player. So he's not going to hit the totals because he has to convince people to play them. Whereas other players, you would at least rack up a couple wins at minimum, right? But Kevin Durant was terrible as a rookie, but in his first 3 seasons was productive. And so added to his cumulative wins produced for his career, Mark Eaton basically did not get that same opportunity because he was in a junior college, etc. And as well as in his prime, when he is really, really good, he's not getting played as much as other players, so he doesn't get a chance to rack up the same Bricado prime that we would like. So, I mean, I think I agree with you. He wasn't great. To your point of not winning a title, one thing I brought up in the article that I do think is really important is a lot of it was timing. I noted that he graduated. I mean, imagine this America, right, Brian? He graduated in the 70s from high school, I think 74, and got a job making 20,000 a year as a mechanic. That would be a little over 100,000 right now. And so basically his logic is, why would I go to school and play basketball? I've got a 6-figure job right now. And I mean, by the way, anybody that rightfully knows politics, fuck Ronald Reagan as an example, you look at wage stagnation in the United States. And basically, for the past 50 years, just wages haven't gone up. So it's going. In the 70s, you could make good money in a vocational trade. That is no longer the case. And something hopefully should change about that. We'll see where we're at in a few years. I'm not optimistic at the moment, Brian. So that's one. He was born in an era where the NBA versus just a vocational trade wasn't a big enough trade-off. And I even mentioned, right, he turned down playing for the Phoenix Suns to go to school instead. And that additionally might not have been a bad call, right? Him going, I should just get my degree from UCLA and maybe get, instead of a $20,000 a year job, a $50,000 a year job, instead of hoping that the Suns like me. And then when he finally did get drafted by the Jazz, he basically said, I might go overseas, and they had to coerce him to play at 100,000 a year, which, as I mentioned in the article, is about 500,000 this about now. Whereas in the modern NBA, like if you are the very, very last pick in the draft, you're still eligible to make over $1 million average for 2 seasons. So his era really hurt him in terms of both the opportunities he was presented with that he would want to do. And I think that's what hurt us, right? I think if Mark Eaton were born in the 80s, he is going to be playing basketball seriously in high school, which means he is going to be a higher recruit in college. And he is, possibly going to get drafted higher. And then, like I mentioned, if you get drafted higher, play more minutes. And if you play more minutes in your prime and put up a much better number. And I think, to my point of his Hall of Fame numbers not looking as good as we would like, a lot of that just comes down to timing.
Yeah, that's true. And the offense really gets it for me, though. So if you look, you're talking about Ben Wallace earlier, and then the other one that's obvious is Dennis Rodman, right? 2 guys in the Hall of Fame solely for defense almost. And of course, I would say both of them were much better on defense than Eaton even though Eaton was a tremendous shot blocker. But they were probably better all-around defenders than he was. But at the same time, even though those 2 guys didn't, shoot very much and didn't focus on offense at all, they were at least got by. They were passable on offense. And like you said, like Eaton's got true shooting down in even the 40s some year. So, to me, that's the big problem I have.
But I mean, as I've also mentioned, comparing this to other sports, what is frustrating about the NBA is actually exactly what you're saying. Is in the NBA, we want our grades to be good at everything. Whereas in other sports, right, I said this about Ben Wallace, right? If he was a football player, he'd be a great cornerback. If he was a hockey player, he'd be a great goalie. Baseball player.
Wait, cornerback? There's a 6'9" cornerbacks. No way.
No, well, but I'm just pointing. I don't know. Actually, that would be a good question. What is the most important defensive position in football?
It is cornerback, but you can't have that body type. You need to be like generally 6'2" or shorter, and really fast.
But I'm just making the point of saying, if you're the best cornerback in the NFL, you'll get into Hall of Fame, and no one's going to care that you didn't. Not only will no one care that you didn't do anything on offense you're not supposed to. In baseball, my best example is Mariano Rivera, who was not, obviously was not good at anything else. He's a relief pitcher, so he doesn't come into bat. And baseball has this weird thing. And my point is just like, if you're a multiple defensive player of the year, you belong in the Hall of Fame. He played on some great teams. And really just the rough part about him for me was just timing. I think I mentioned in the article, I think if he had been born a decade later and still got drafted to the Jazz, they might win a title with him starting as center in the mid-90s. As is, though, right, basically the Lakers ruled the West over the 80s. And then in the 90s, essentially the Suns and Portland Trailblazers were really good. And then by the time the Jazz were the team, Mark Eaton was out of the league with injury.
Yeah, and also the Bulls were really dominant then and kicking the Jazz's ass. So,
well, but but I mean, those 2 finals with the Bulls, it's just rough, right? Karl Malone forgot how to shoot free throws one game, if I recall. Of course, there is the infamous, right? Did Michael Jordan shove off Byron Scott? I want to say.
No, it was Craig Elo or Jeff Hornacek, one of those guys, white guys.
Really? Okay. Well,
we might be talking about different plays, but
Michael Jordan's very last play, 98. Byron Russell? I thought it was a Byron.
Oh, Brian Russell. Sure. Oh, okay, you're right. I'm like 10 years in the past. Okay.
I messed it all up. Oh, you're thinking of like the Cleveland play where he jumps up.
Yes.
but I don't think he shoved there. I just think he destroyed someone's soul with that play. But the point of those, right, is the Jazz just kind of got, some tough breaks against a very good Bulls team. Although one point about that, the Michael Jordan shove off play is, they still had another game to play, right? So even if the Bulls had lost that game, they had one more, and I believe they had home court. So, I think they'd have been all right.
Well, I saw that Last Dance documentary, so clearly it was all foretold and was going to happen anyway. Yeah. It was inevitable.
Silly stuff. So, I hope I've at least convinced you a little, because even in the article, I kind of said, I would put Mark Eaton borderline as an advanced analytics head, but when I kind of start mixing the advanced analytics with mainstream, and that's where I really get going. So I'm like, listen, if a 2-time defensive player of the year doesn't belong in the Hall of Fame, what even matters? And then I've had the same converse thing, right, where I've seen like writers like Jeff Pearlman go, Chris Bosh does belong in the Hall of Fame, and that's the exact opposite, right, where I'm like, this is an 11-time All-Star. So I'm like, okay, what do you want? And then I think you said something that we've both agreed on before, which is, the Hall of Fame could probably let in every NBA player and we'd be okay, because it is just such an elite league of players. It's the best of the best of the best ever play. Fewer than 5,000 players have played in the NBA total. You compare that to any other field, right? I think, like I said, you could if you could basically say, if you've played a game in the NBA, you are one of the best basketball players ever. We'll let you into the Hall. And then we already had a podcast episode where I discussed why I kind of hate this weird meritocracy argument and gatekeepingness about that.
Yeah, that's the real question, right? Is what do you think the Hall of Fame should be? What does it mean to you? And I think we're on the same page here. To me, it should just be like a museum of history, where you just want to get as much stuff into as you can, the good or the bad, right? Pete Rose famously in the Baseball Hall of Fame, right? No one wants
that. Yeah, let's actually follow that tangent, because I was going to say, I could see and do see the argument for keeping Pete Rose out of the Hall of Fame. And as a comparable, not as bad. So I want this clear. Actually, it's worse in my opinion. You look at Derrick Rose in the NBA and this weird rehabilitation image that he's got going.
Right.
And I'm okay saying, okay, he was not convicted by a jury of his peers. And at some point, you basically do have to essentially say, all right, if the criminal justice system says this, we adhere to that, and fine. But I'm also okay saying we don't have to have Derrick Rose be an ambassador of any sort. And to your point about the Hall of Fame being about, proper icons in history, I think it's acceptable to not have Pete Rose in there as an exalted figure, right? As an inductee. You can basically, if you're looking at it as a museum, say, okay, his records are there. We'll talk about those, but we are not going to give him the honor of being, a Hall of Fame inductee. I'm okay with that. Now, where that easily falls apart quickly is in the annals of the Hall of Fame, in terms of, transgressions people that have made the Hall of Fame have done. Pete Rose betting on baseball, that's not good. It's not a good look for the sport. But there are many people in the Hall of Fame, I'm sure, that have done worse things. So even to that, I'm basically snapping it back immediately, saying, I understand the argument and can even agree with the argument for keeping Pete Rose in the Hall of Fame. But I'm going, well, by the way, if that's the standard, there are a hell of a lot of players you should be yanking out of the Hall of Fame really quickly.
Yeah, that's right. And, off the top of my head, Ty Cobb, a virulent racist, may have murdered somebody, and he's in the Hall of Fame. So, yeah, he's clearly much worse than Pete Rose. I understand, like, they don't want to celebrate somebody who, ruined the integrity of the game. But, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I just think it's just like what's going on with, Black history right now, right? The 1619 Project, there's a bunch of states saying we need to ban the teaching of, slavery in the United States. And it's like, you can't just ignore stuff and sweep it under the rug. You have to talk about it and acknowledge that bad stuff happened in the past in order to tackle the future, right? So, yeah, instead of, kicking some people out and figuring out where to draw the line, I think you should just put all of baseball's history in there and talk about the good and the bad. Because look at what baseball was like, in the old days. We had all these horrible commissioners, Kennesaw Mountain Landis, and just just ruining the players' labor rights. And, a lot of people probably remember Kurt Flood had to go through that stuff in the 70s after that. So the point I'm getting at is I just don't see a place where you can draw the line considering the bad history of all these sports leagues. So let's just be honest, get everyone into the Hall of Fame and say, it doesn't have to be this exalted thing. Maybe there needs to be Famers, gold level Hall of Famers, and silver. I don't know. Like maybe you want to divide up the tiers, but anyway.
Yeah. Okay, so that actually gives the other topic I wanted to talk about was actually the Boston Celtics. A lot of ridiculousness there. One aspect that recently happened is Kyrie Irving came out and said there was issue with racism in Boston. It's an Onion story, Brian, so I'm going to keep going, but I couldn't make this up if I was writing this Onion piece. Kyrie Irving in a playoff game, he's on the Brooklyn Nets. They were playing the Boston Celtics. He stepped on the face of the Boston Celtics mascot, which is a leprechaun essentially. So this is where it gets ridiculous, right? The Boston Celtics are basically named after Irish Americans. It would be the Celtics, so it's spelled Celtics, even though it should be Celtics. And their mascot is essentially a caricature of that group of people. And people were offended that Kyrie stepped on a caricature of a group of white people, essentially, while explaining that Boston is racist. Like I said, I couldn't have made that up if I tried. Just the utter ridiculousness of that. It's worth noting that famous African American players that played for Boston had issues with racism while they were there. It's like, to what you're saying, right? You don't have to sweep things under the rug. Boston as an area has had problems with racism in sports for years, right? The speaking of baseball, right? The Red Sox, everybody talks about the curse of the Bambino. They traded away Babe Ruth for who knows, right? A horrible trade, and didn't win for years. Part of that history, part of a very obvious explanation is they were one of the last teams to integrate. So after, Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in baseball, the Red Sox were one of the teams that held out the longest before basically they said, we'd rather be racist than have good baseball players. And of course, it's hilarious to your exact point in the Hall of Fame, right, Brian, is we'd rather say, oh, the curse of the Bambino, this is why they're bad. It's like, no, they were bad because they made racist decisions. And it would be nice if that was more front and center and more taught. I can even feel some of you bristling as I bring this stuff up because it is an uncomfortable subject, but that is what it is. But that all happened with Kyrie Irving, which was ridiculous. And I don't have much to say on that beyond get over it, if that makes any sense. Kyrie Irving made a decent point, and the way to prove him wrong is to improve things going forward. There's no shouting him down and saying, how dare you say that? How dare you disrespect Boston? For what it's worth, we had this exact discussion, right? The Celtics with Kyrie Irving looked a lot better than recent, and we get to eat crow, right? We were like, yeah, you know what? Who is it? How am I dropping the player's name?
Yeah, it's Kemba Walker. He's been really bad in Boston, injured and playing poorly.
Yeah, or like Kemba Walker, Kyrie Irving, same difference. No, Kyrie Irving played much better than Kemba Walker for Boston. Kyrie Irving is playing really good for Brooklyn right now. And I even tweeted about that at one point where I basically said, they should be less offended by Kyrie Irving stepping on their logo and more offended by what he's doing to them when the game clock's going. All right. Got a wild story to follow that up with, Brian, and then hopefully we can race to the playoffs. But basically, Danny Ainge resigned as the GM of Boston. And I'm conflicted on this because I don't think he was a bad GM. I think there is stuff we've criticized him for. But I think what makes that hard is, one, a lot of times we're not privy to all of the backroom dealings with trades. And so from a high level, we can go, I can't believe he didn't pull the trigger for DeMarcus Cousins or for Jimmy Butler. And we don't know if there were other factors going on that we missed. And that's what makes them hard to judge, right? We don't know what else was going on. Additionally, I would say if Gordon Hayward hadn't gotten injured immediately after getting signed, Boston looks a hell of a lot better. Boston had some injury issues that did ding them, but I mean they've been a perennial playoff team. They've had they made the conference finals against LeBron James, and if Isaiah Thomas doesn't get injured, they probably have a good shot. So it's hard to call him a failure or be too upset with him. So I want that out there. The weird follow-up is a basketball blogger. I believe he does Bleacher Report for the most part. Tyler Conway, I want to say, made a farcical ESPN story where he said that Danny Ainge was quit basically over Kyrie Irving stepping on the mascot.
Tyler Conway's a big troll.
And Danny Ainge used to kiss the mascot when he was on the Celtics, and of course he was a player, and that he viewed the mascot as a son. Now, I've got a lot on this subject. So the first is the defense Tyler had after the fact is it was obviously satire. Here's the rough part about that defense is if enough people believe you, including main names, you can't use it was obviously satire comment. And in the age of Trump, where we have seen some key public figures with some ludicrous takes, it is a hard defense. I think it is perfectly legitimate to say, and I fell on this too, Brian. I retweeted it immediately with a flippant comment, and then actually kind of went, this doesn't sound right. And I looked it up and then, noticed other people saying it was obviously fake, and then, took down my tweets. There should be better fact checking in media. You always, but you always bring up this note. It's the algorithm, right? Our modern social media platforms are not built for well-researched and nuanced discussion. They want you yelling, which means that tweet, if it gets enough engagement, Twitter is going to be perfectly fine boosting it, despite the fact that it is a lie. And it is reasonable to point to people and say you should do a better job fact checking, especially those in the media, at the same time noticing that as humans we are flawed, and if something seems reasonable enough, it is easy enough for us to believe it and pass it on. So I'm basically talking out of both sides of my mouth there, noting I can see arguments on both sides of saying people should have fact checked this better, versus it's really easy to make something that looks official and is fake, and it's hard to get mad at people for following stuff like that, especially when our social media sites are more than willing to make those look legit.
Well, next time, instead of saying you're talking out of both sides of your mouth, make it fancier, like, this is just, dialectics, like Hegelian dialectics, perfectly well-disciplined method. So on Ainge, what I was reading is that this was in the works for a long time, that basically a year ago he was ready to step away. And same thing with Stevens. Stevens didn't want to coach anymore. So they're like, okay, you can be GM. For better or worse, I don't know how much of a GM he is. But I think the what I heard about Ainge, I kind of agree with, which is that good talent evaluator, kind of a poor manager, and made, some poor decisions at times. And overall, that's a pretty successful run. And they won a title with Ainge, right? So anytime you win a title, I've got to say that group did a good enough job, even if they were, poor in other ways. Like, he did orchestrate that whole, Kevin Garnett trade and Paul Pierce that led directly to the title, right? Or sorry, Ray Allen. So, that's a pretty good trade, pretty good run.
It is almost baseballish. I'm stealing a point. Kevin Pritchard, former GM of the Blazers, and I believe he's still in the Indiana Pacers front office. But he was kind of noticing on draft picks, very baseballish, going, if you're a good draft evaluator, but your hit rate is like 40%, which would be really good for what it's worth, you can miss 2 or 3 drafts in a row. And if you're selling your team a hinky plan and your draft picks all look like busts after 3 seasons, you can be shown the door. And in fact, he was in Portland. And, you would argue, right, he got Lillard. Lillard was amazing. And he got Odin, and Odin was just injured. So it's kind of one of these, like, sometimes you make the right pick. Blake Griffin's another example, but I would consider an amazing draft pick that just not the same caliber as some of the other top draft picks, and it was just health. So it's like
Yep.
sometimes you make the right picks and still don't win. It's really hard to judge GMs because it really is 1 to 2 moves a season that are, make or break for a franchise.
Mm-hmm.
And I just said, right, if Gordon Hayward is healthy for that team and sees the Brad Stevens boost that we saw players like Kyrie Irving get, that team could have made, a couple more Western Conference finals, maybe made another finals, right? Remember, Cleveland kept killing Toronto just kind of mercilessly and meanly. Like Toronto looked great on paper and could never make it to the conference finals because Cleveland just hated them. It's like I could have seen.
Kyle Lowry was getting buried during those series.
Yeah, Kyle Lowry, love him, and we it's nice that we got a natural experiment verifying it. It was like, oh yeah, it was DeMar DeRozan, and the DeMar DeRozan has gone and helped out the Spurs have the same woes. Shocker. But yeah, so it's like a couple of moves could have gone better. I don't have much to say there. On the and I think we agree. It's like, and I think when you underperform relative to the expectations, that is the rough part. If you're in Boston, this is a team, this is a squad that's right second most NBA titles. Kind of roll my eyes at that because counting the NBA titles from the 60s is whatever. But they did win 3 titles in the 80s. Obviously got buried due to injuries to Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, and of course Len Bias in the 90s. It was really hard for them to come back from that. Made 2 finals in the 2000s, right? So it's really hard to have that pedigree in your background and not feel disappointed if your team doesn't go far a couple of playoffs in a row, but it's also really hard to judge. I want one last part in the really crazy Tyler Conway, and I'm using this as a teachable moment. Don't know the person's name exactly, although they are a reasonably good software developer that has made some sites for RAPM. Dave Barry did what a lot of us in the social media sphere did. We retweeted the Tyler Conway point with our own flippant point on top of it. And this person responded to Dave Barry and said, I'm not surprised Mr. Bad research, but thinks because it's published, it's good, would fall for this or something. And as I mentioned, the teachable moment is Dave Barry was not alone in falling for it. I admitted I fell for it. I pinged Dave after I realized it was fake. I was like, by the way, it's fake. And he said, I didn't realize. And the reason he didn't realize is a couple of mainstream NBA journalists that he follows had retweeted it. So it's kind of like going, when a bunch of people fall for a common foible, and that was kind of my point at the very beginning when I was talking out of both sides of my mouth. I've already forgotten your more verbose expressions I could have used there, Brian.
No, that's just a random philosophy term or method. Sorry, dialectics. Anyway,
love it. I'll have to look it up, and maybe I'll see if I can work that into the title. But all I was saying is, right, when a bunch of people fall for something, I perk up when I notice the amount of missing the word. Basically, if you hold someone to a higher standard than everybody else, I'm going to notice. And I've had that complaint being in the Wages of Wins Boxscore Geek group going, I don't mind the scrutiny that some of us get for our analytics takes. What I mind is that same scrutiny seems to be lapse or missing for other analysts and or other metrics. See, my cat is like 100% on board. She's saying preach. And I do take notice of that. And I actually did respond to the person and said, hey, I said, he wasn't the only one that fell for this, and I'm sure you'll get to the rest of them in due time. He did not respond to me. But just as I said, a teachable moment, which is to go, I think a term you've used a lot, Brian, is bad faith. It is very obviously bad faith when you come up with a concern to someone and I go, yeah, but you never do that to anybody else, right? It is impossible to take Republicans seriously for a lot of things they profess to be worried about. Oh, we are completely worried about, freedom of speech or gun rights. And you go, then where were you when this person was getting fired over something they said? Where were you when this person was shot by the police for having a gun? It's very obvious. Sorry to make that, I took that way too far politically, Brian, for how simple the take itself was.
All right, I'll just be more general then, which is that you just the way the information ecosystem is now and the way it's changing so rapidly, we just have to be extremely skeptical of all information. during that same news cycle, something else happened. I didn't catch the stuff with Tyler Conway, but I did notice that this thing was going viral saying Trump wore his pants backwards during his speech in North Carolina. And there's photographs of him wearing pants basically without a zipper, apparently, in the photograph. People buried him. Oh, Trump has dementia, blah, blah, blah. Of course, it turned out to be fake, right? He did wear his pants normally with a zipper, and somebody just fooled all these people online that wanted to attack Trump. So just be skeptical of everything. If it's, if it's not from a major news source, you should probably go find it from a major news source first. And you said Tyler Conway wrote this on ESPN, so that's very tricky. I don't know.
No. So actually, to your point too, this is a huge one. If it is a screenshot and you don't have a URL,
yes,
that is a giveaway. And so that was
yes.
it, right? He had something that looked like it was from ESPN with his own text, but it's like, yeah, it's not hard if you have the font and the font and the graphic for you to put together something that looks like it's from ESPN. So if you don't see a link, and I've seen that happen before too. One of the ones I recall was something like people were mad at Kaepernick with Nike, and so they were lighting their shoes on fire. And people actually were copying a link, but it was like from a fake NBC, if that makes any sense, right? There was this weird suffix like XQ whatever .NBC and then it was a weird sorry, I got that wrong, prefix and suffix. So I clicked on it, was like, this isn't NBC, right? This is a site someone has made to look like NBC. So yep. A lot of that, it is a lot of work. And I've said this before, I am frustrated in that it is obvious that Twitter and Facebook and Google could all actually use their vast amount of powers to vet things, right? There have been times, right, Facebook started experimenting with, hey, this site, this information hasn't been verified. And they've kind of done kid gloves with that take, right? When they're under scrutiny, and then it disappears because they'd rather have the clicks. But is what it is.
No, that's what it is, right? They're doing half measures so they can free ride and make money off the clicks. It's like, well, if the insurrection on 1/6 had succeeded and the government was overthrown, the tech companies probably wouldn't remain solvent, right? They'd be seized by the dictatorship and they'd lose that golden goose. But instead, they're like, nah, we're going to push the envelope. We're going to make money off all this disinformation and let someone else clean up the mess. The courts, the political system, whatever. So, I think it's just, cowardly, greedy free riding by the tech companies.
I was going to say, I did love the mountain out of a molehill. I do think all of the things we said are legitimate problems, but of course the initial issue is a fake tweet making fun of Danny Ainge, which is kind of rough too, because he's quitting, and like I said, he had a good tenure. I'd give him a Hall of Fame. When we're talking Hall of Fames, I mean, I'd say he's probably a Hall of Fame GM for that run. I'd give it to him. So
maybe as a player as well. I don't know, maybe not. But
probably for sure when you combine the two. All right, let's race through the playoffs. All right, here's a few fun ones. Let's start with the Knicks versus the Hawks. Like I said, kind of happy that Derrick Rose didn't get adulation. Let's give 2 points. Trae Young's really good, and you know who else is really good, Brian? Clint Capella, amazing player. My flippant comment about the Knicks and the Hawks is, Capella plus Trae Young's pretty good. If you could, team those two up with like Chris Paul, that core of 3 players could, maybe win a title. So, just throwing that out there as a suggestion.
I was really high on the Hawks coming into the season. Like, they had a lot of good players, and they were pretty disappointing early on because they had all these injuries, right? So it's great to see the Hawks doing well in the playoffs again. They have a lot of talent. I don't think they're going to be able to keep it all, though. Like, John Collins is a free agent. It'll be great to watch them. And like we were saying, I think last show, Trae Young has really taken a step forward and is a super legit guy. Like, he's starting to take those Steph Curry and Damian Lillard type of shots and making them with good consistency, in addition to being a playmaker. So, and they have a lot of other talent as well. On the Knicks were such a classic Thibodeau team this year. No offense at all. I have the series up right now during the regular season, but during the playoffs, they shot 45.8%. Looks like Dre's going to take a break, so I'll keep talking about this series. So, Man, the Knicks, they did the best with what they had, I think. They improved a lot over last year without significantly better players. So just like, playing hard and playing defense got them through it. I heard someone make a comment that's, I'll subtweet, I don't remember who that person was, saying that basically the reason why the Knicks' luck ran out in the playoffs is because the Thibodeau and the players themselves, they motivated themselves to get them playing really hard, and they played hard all during the regular season. Oh, it was Draymond Green who said this. Draymond Green said it on Inside the NBA. Actually, I'll repeat this, Dre, since you just came back.
One of those days, Brian, my cat was locked in the office, and of course, when I went to let him out, he was like, "Oh, so we are playing chase."
Yeah.
And as you know, pre-show, for those listeners that don't know, I need to replace at least a cord, if not the mixer, for my professional mic. And if I touch stuff too much, it makes like a scratchy noise. So that happened. So to get up to go grab the cat, I scratch the mic. So yeah, okay. I heard, the last thing I heard was you basically saying that Thibodeau had a defensive focused team.
Yeah.
And I think what I would look at is, I think Randall is probably overrated. I was kind of surprised by that his numbers had kind of dropped back down to earth. Who was the other? There's another player that was really good that just didn't get as much time in the playoffs. But I mean, the Hawks were a good team. 4 versus 5. It's not shocking if 5 wins.
Yeah, so Draymond Green on Inside the NBA made a smart comment about this, which is that the Knicks played really hard all season and their defense looked great, but then once everyone else starts playing hard in the playoffs, because LeBron famously doesn't play as hard during the regular season, many other players as well, right? That things kind of caught up with the Knicks because they had no offense, and that's fair. We frown upon Derrick Rose, I think rightfully so, both for his on and off the court production. But another Chicago guy that Thibodeau brought in, who we love, and I've talked a lot about over the years, and I'm like, why isn't anyone getting this guy in? Taj Gibson, right? He brought Taj Gibson back into the rotation. He played pretty well. But, the Knicks actually need some players that can shoot if they're going to go anywhere. I don't think they have those guys right now. And I haven't seen enough from Barrett yet, but he's pretty young, so we'll have to see. The Hawks have depth. They have stars. I think it's really unlikely that they're going to, win a round in the playoffs, another round, but
you never know.
I like where they're headed.
Didn't they win? They won game 1, right?
That's a good question. Let's look. Let's get that old bracket up here. Yeah, you're right. Actually, they did. That was yesterday's game, right? I watched that game and forgot about it.
That's a shame. And then, there's a lot more. I think you've got a key point, which is who knows if they can keep it together. So I hope they make a good run this year, and hope nothing for the best for Trae Young and Clint Capella, at least, because they do have those players for a while.
Yep.
Let's talk. Okay, so the Lakers Suns is an interesting series, and I've got a lot of interesting thoughts here. By the way, Brian, I was going to note that I had a couple of no prizes on last show that we recorded, which was 3 weeks ago at this point. One of them, by the way, was so 2 of them were Lakers based, by the way. So one of them is, I said the Lakers had a streak of wins in the 70s when they had Wilt Chamberlain and the logo Jerry West. I said that they had a streak that had been broken in NBA history. It's 33 games. It has not been broken. It is an unbeaten record. The closest other teams have gotten is 28. So that was one no prize, meaning something I said that was mistaken, that listeners could notice. No one noticed that, by the way, including some amazing Lakers fans. So you're on notice. Another one is I messed up. I thought that it was the Rick Paul was on the Fab Five. You actually got it right on the show. You noticed it was Rob Pelinka, where I got that wrong. And then actually one other kind of no prize thing that I messed up is when I was listing off stars. I mentioned that for the Memphis Grizzlies, their star, I said Ja Morant. The real star was Jonas Valanciunas. And for the Knicks, you just got it correctly with Taj Gibson. But I said Julius Randle. Julius Randle was okay, but not amazing.
He got most improved player of the year, I want to say. He got a lot of credit, but it was mostly just points, right? More
Yeah,
points.
it was minutes. I mean,
Yeah.
it gets utterly ridiculous when players just get more minutes and do exactly what they've been doing and get called most improved. And the real question is why the hell? This was exactly my point about Mark Eaton is going. This player was great, and you just didn't play them. And then suddenly you're going to say, "Oh, they've gotten so much better." It's like, no, you were just a shitty coach that didn't play him. Julius Randle's kind of iffy. He's a fine starter, but he's not amazing. So is what it is.
He's probably a good defender considering how good that Knicks defense was.
It was probably good that we got some distance. I know you were actually a little bummed. I felt really bad about this, the Warriors versus the Lakers, and I think something important about that is really rough about the play-in, but is fine, is the Warriors put it all on the line, right? You know, the Warriors went for a win against the Lakers. They were really close, and it is a playoff pet peeve of mine when a team loses a close game. If a team loses an overtime game in the playoffs, you have nothing. You have nothing. You have no comment as to why they won or lost. There is no obviously this team did whatever better, right? If I believe I didn't watch the game live, but I believe Draymond Green had an opportunity on a layup to put the game away in regulation.
Yep.
If Draymond Green makes that shot, then the exact same people that were explaining how stupid it was to give Draymond Green the last shot, the same people that are talking about the stupid decisions Kerr made in that game are going to say amazing decisions, amazing rotation, etc. Right? But
well, there's a lot of Kerr hate out there. They would say they won despite Kerr, probably.
Okay,
but I take your point though on Draymond.
Okay, so maybe even a win wouldn't be enough to get everybody back on Kerr's side. But I mean, for what it's worth, right? When Kerr was winning a bunch of games, he's an amazing coach, right? Coach of the year candidate. But what was really rough about the play-in, right, is the Warriors played it all, ended up in an overtime game, and essentially had a back-to-back after an overtime, and looked gassed against the Grizzlies, which is just really rough. The Lakers were fine to the same point. It was probably telling that they had a rough time with the Warriors, and the sad reality of the Warriors, or the not Warriors, wishful thinking, Brian, the Lakers Suns series was just injury and age. I'm happy I get to pat myself on the back again, where I just said before the playoffs, I said Anthony Davis has not looked healthy, and LeBron James has missed extended time. Why are we under this belief that this team is just going to come back and be great? And sadly, Anthony Davis and LeBron James just were not themselves. And in fact, the Suns almost got some bad luck of their own, just kind of classic, right? With Chris Paul. I got some love for a tweet where I basically said a playoff series where the outcome of it rests on the health of Chris Paul and Anthony Davis is essentially a decade of New Orleans basketball, in one series. So on our notes for the show, I just said sad because it's like this series came down to health. And a bigger point I tweeted about this little today, Brian, is it is remarkable to me that bubble basketball is getting called an anomaly which by the way, absolutely agree. We had early season with Patrick. We discussed this where we said we agree the bubble was not normal basketball, but also playoff basketball is never about finding the best team, right? It's a tournament with lots of twists and turns where health and other things dictate the winner. And all of the teams had to deal with it, right? So it's still a title. But what is remarkable to me is that people are saying bubble basketball shouldn't count instead of going, isn't it really weird that all of these teams that essentially spent 2 to 3 months inside of a bubble and then basically what was the amount of time between the finals and the start of the NBA season? Like less than 2 months, right?
Something like that, yeah.
Ridiculous going, well, all these teams that played really late into the playoffs last year, none of them, I saw people going, none of them got far. Bubble basketball is a myth. And I'm like, all of those teams dealt with injury. Like the Nuggets are lucky as hell that Nikola Jokic is an MVP. He's amazing. Michael Porter Jr. saw a huge jump. Aaron Gordon was a great late season trade in terms of Gary Harris was injured, not playing great, and Aaron Gordon was an upgrade in the front court, right? So those two things put together really, really helped. And Austin Rivers hasn't sucked. He hasn't been great. He hasn't been good. He's been a replacement level player, but for Austin Rivers, that is amazing. The Nuggets got a lot of luck for them staying good, but most teams that played late bubble have just been severely banged up, and the Lakers are no exception. And I said that the last show we recorded, where I was like, I don't understand this optimism. I mean, I understand that LeBron James and Anthony Davis are great. And actually, Brian, I forgot to put this on the script directly, but of course we get to talk it. Anthony Davis was really beat up and attempted to play in game 6, right? The elimination game.
Yep.
And made it a couple minutes basically, and then left injured again.
6 minutes in the beginning of the game.
And I brought this up with Kevin Durant and Klay Thompson for the Warriors. And apparently, by the way, I heard someone on Twitter recently note to me that all three of them basically had the same injury. Arturo Galletti has noted that the playoffs are fascinating for players in that there is not drug testing. So players that are older and look a little beat up, the classic example would be Dwayne Wade, and questionable this playoff series would be Blake Griffin, suddenly look a lot better in the playoffs when they're not getting drug tested regularly. So who knows what drugs they're potentially getting that might improve them. But the issue with Anthony Davis, Kevin Durant, and Klay Thompson is basically, I heard it described as like a broken wheel, right? No amount of drugs is going to fix that. They're just hurt. And with Anthony Davis, I kind of said, it is ridiculous that he was out on the court, right? The cold calculating economist take on Kevin Durant and Klay Thompson is they were both on expiring deals. This is potentially your last shot at a finals with that core. Roll them out. And worst case scenario, this was true for both Klay and Kevin Durant. They can get signed wherever they want next season. So you don't even have to be worried ethically, right, that Kevin Durant's going to lose out on money or Klay Thompson's going to lose out on money. Let them play. I saw a really rough follow-up to Anthony Davis. And so my take there is Anthony Davis should not have been playing. And it is kind of inexcusable if you have a multi-$100, not multi-hundred, that'd be a little too much time, $100 million asset in Anthony Davis. It is unforgivable for a franchise to risk that on one playoff game. Like I said, the cold calculating economist for Klay and Kevin Durant is you're not risking $100 million. It's still ethically reprehensible, but financially it's fine. Whereas Anthony Davis is going, what the hell are you doing, right? You're risking a huge part of the franchise. I bashed how NBA teams are run for that. Follow up to that, I saw an interesting interview with Kenyon Martin that I passed along to you, where he said he almost punched George Karl once when George Karl sat him during a playoff game. So there is this very weird dichotomy of athletes saying, I want to play, it's the playoffs, I have to play, and a franchise going, hate to tell you, you're $100 million asset. I don't feel super bad saying that because tax-wise, that is how they're defined. You can actually use depreciation on players as if they were an asset in terms of U.S. tax law. So I would say it's a rough one where I understand that you have very strong-willed players that want to play through injury and franchises that want to win that are incentivized to let them play, but also go, if you've invested 4 years at like 30 million plus a year, as the Lakers have done with Anthony Davis, you got to think long-term in this case. And it was unforgivable that he played and it didn't even matter, right? They just got destroyed.
Yeah, I mostly agree. I want to be a little bit careful though, because it's not clear to me that those 3 injuries are the same or not, or they have some differences. First let's state the obvious, right? Anthony Davis did get injured in that game and had to leave, but he did not suffer like an Achilles injury or an ACL or whatever like Durant and Thompson did. So the process was probably bad, but the result for the Lakers was not that bad for them. They got a shot to roll the dice on that game and didn't injure their player long term.
I think they got lucky, and I still think it was a bad call.
Yeah, no, I agree. As far as the Suns go, Paul's health aside, they are looking like they did earlier in the season. Like maybe they were just coasting a little bit at the end of the regular season, but they look really dangerous again. And I don't know off the top of my head what Paul's status is, but if he does play again in the playoffs, yeah, I would be really scared of the Phoenix Suns. They looked really good against the Lakers. But I mean, this just kind of does reveal something about the Lakers roster, right? We were talking to Chris Ye earlier in the year, for instance, or before the season. He was higher on Schroeder than I was. Taylor Horton-Tucker was okay, but he didn't end up playing a huge role and playing a lot of minutes. So what I'm getting at is the non-Durant, non-LeBron, non-Davis players didn't really come through for the Lakers.
Well, let's forgive. This is an annoying argument I always get into, and the Lakers are a great franchise for this, which is when you try and use a player like Kobe as a high usage player and say, look how much worse the team played without Kobe than with him. See, he's so great. Argument is, as a franchise, you should be able to take $25 million, which is what Kobe was making in his later seasons. You should be able to take $25 million and replace Kobe Bryant's production and get, either with one player, if not a couple. That's the funny thing, right? You can't take $25 million and replace LeBron James production without getting another player at that caliber. You could, even at his peak, do that with Kobe Bryant. Although it is borderline. I do say 2008. I've got no problem with Kobe Bryant winning MVP in 2008. I mean, it should have been Chris Paul. Like, that's who I would have given my vote to. But I don't besmirch anybody for giving it to Kobe Bryant, using the same kind of logic as Martin. You pass a threshold, and as long as you pass that threshold, I have no complaints, and you can use other arguments to get the person in. But with the Lakers this season, the exact same argument people used to use on Kobe. Oh, well, Kobe's out and the team looks horrible. See, they need him. It's really hard for a team to deal with your high usage players being injured or leaving or not being as good, right? What the hell are you supposed to do with Anthony Davis? Is Anthony Davis is taking 15 shots a game. He's supposed to make 7 or 8 of those and get to the line, 10 times, or not 10 times, that'd be a lot, 5 times, right? That's what he's supposed to do. If he's hitting 3 or 4 of those and getting to the line 2 times, he's much worse. You tell Anthony Davis to stop shooting so much, what do you do? So with the Lakers, I can't even be that mad at their role players and backups, because it's going, the game plan for playoff basketball got shoved out the door, and that's just rough. I think I've made this note about the Lakers before, just I think they were lucky to win bubble basketball. It's not that I don't think they were a contender. I think they had a shot in the normal playoffs, but I think some good teams played worse in the bubble for team cohesion reasons. The Clippers tore themselves apart, and I mean, there was some funny rumors there, right? That basically, like, Paul George cheated on Doc Rivers' daughter, and you can maybe get over that normally. That's the rumors. I'm not sure it's true. But then, if you're stuck in the same hotel with that person right next to him, maybe you're not. Paul George said he had some mental health issues while in the bubble, right? The Miami Heat played much better and were a very cohesive team, whereas the Bucks, Chris Middleton, I believe it was Chris Middleton, but a player on the Bucks game was like, yeah, I haven't touched a basketball in 4 months. So it's like bubble basketball hit teams in different ways. I'm not saying the Lakers didn't have a shot outside of bubble basketball, but I think their odds got greatly improved inside of bubble basketball. So I think they were lucky to win a title. They've had 2 very unlucky seasons due to health, but the net effect of the LeBron experiment has been a positive, right? Exactly what you're saying about Danny Ainge, right? You win a title, you win. So
Yep.
I feel bad for him, but at the same time, I'm like, your overall luck is still probably a positive at this point, right? Because you got a title with 3 teams that were title worthy. Certainly the Lakers when, remember, didn't the Lakers, even before they got AD, the Lakers with LeBron, didn't they beat the Warriors on Christmas Day? And then LeBron James got injured and everything fell apart.
Yeah, you're saying in the year the Raptors won, right? 2019?
Yeah. So,
Yeah,
like,
that
so
because
LeBron,
Lakers were not very good that year, other than LeBron, so it was kind of a weird game.
they had some young players, but of course, what they had expected to happen was to either pick up Kawhi, Paul George, or AD that season. And for reasons, agent reasons, stuff, they didn't get him. So, that season kind of was a combination of bad luck with trades and bad luck with injury. The next season, good luck to win in the bubble. This season, bad luck with injury, but the net is, I would say, overall positive. We'll see where they go from here. It's going to be rough, because they have so much invested in LeBron and AD. I wouldn't worry too much about it. In terms of the Suns, I'm rooting. I would say Nuggets, Nets, and Suns are kind of my 3 top teams that I would love to see win. But let's rush through the rest.
Sure.
Didn't go as I'm sorry. Yeah, these are such interesting series, Brian. I thought I was going to rush through them, but we still won't go super long. The Nuggets versus the Blazers. I've got to say 2 things. Bravo to Damian Lillard. Oh my goodness, just ridiculous. That is one of the great, his 55-point game with the most, I believe he had 12 threes, which I believe is now a playoff record, is one of the greatest playoff basketball games ever. What I noted is if we were doing kind of a 3 stars for that night, 3 best players, it would have been Damian Lillard, I forget the order, but James Harden and Mikal Bridges. It's worth noting all three of these players have been great all season. All three of these players have put up great games all season. So that's not a surprise. Damian Lillard was better than James Harden and Mikal Bridges put together that night. That's ridiculous. An amazing game. I can't believe they won. The other note is the Blazers should not be playing Carmelo Anthony. And I'm so glad they did, because on paper, that's what's funny is what's happening now. The Blazers, after this series, have fired or parted ways, whatever fruitful language you want to use for that, with a coach. And people are going, should they blow it up? And I noted, I was like, this team was a 42-win team this last season, which is only like 6 games out of the top of the West. And if you replace Melo with an average player, they pick up 5 wins this season. So, and the oldest player on that team is Damian Lillard. So it's like they have a young team. I would say Damian Lillard, Yusuf Nurkic, if they play him, Enes Kanter are pretty good. CJ McCollum is overpaid, but is still fine. So it's like, if this team moves on from Melo and gets an average power forward, ideally, I've heard people know that this as well. The right move is see if you can move CJ McCollum, like go approach the Knicks, right? They're fine. So the blow up mentality is ridiculous. So it is just funny that basically Melo playing terribly for the Blazers and Nikola Jokic playing amazingly is why the Nuggets are advancing. I think they're lucky to. And if the Suns are really beat up, I think the Nuggets have another chance. So here's hoping. But it feels bad, right, to basically root on injury for a team to advance. So I don't know. Brian.
No, I mean, we talked about this before. I'm in the opposite place on the Blazers. I don't like their roster as much. Yeah, I mean, obviously Lillard is great. Nurkic is fine, but I don't like a lot of the other players. So here's the biggest problem they have. They've just been one of the worst defensive teams in the league. They can't stop anyone. So if you're going to have Lillard, you can't have McCollum as well. You need more of a defensive shooting guard. And I don't know if Nurkic is considered a good defensive center or not. I know he's okay on offense, but yeah, they've maybe getting rid of Stotts might help their defense, bring in a new system or something. I don't know, but yeah, I would like to see substantial changes there. I'm not really a fan of saying you should blow it up or not. I mean, I think you're right to say that because that's how teams think, but I'm more of, I mean, we're the same way, right? Just keep the good players, get rid of the bad ones, do it like that.
And like I said, I mean, if you have a star, so it's worth noting, I would personally give Curry the MVP nod over Lillard this season. Of course, the winner is Nikola Jokic, and it's just fun. He's the easy winner. I had a bug, by the way, so fun behind the scenes. There was a bug in the Boxscore Geeks code because I've been updating it game by game this season. So the numbers look better this season, which is great. The bug I had, Brian, is I forgot to cut off at the end of the season. So I was basically combining all of the games and giving Patrick the totals. And I forgot to cut it off in the playoffs. So briefly, Rudy Gobert passed Nikola Jokic because we were able to use his playoff numbers and play-in numbers. The play-in is very weird, Brian. Actually, he didn't play in the play-in. I don't know what I'm talking about. But basically, Gobert was a little better in the playoffs than Jokic. But after I removed the playoffs, it went back to correct. And Nikola Jokic wins on total wins for the regular season. I think Gobert was better per minute, but I still give it to Jokic. Damian Lillard placed top 5 in total wins produced this season, was the best point guard in the league by total wins produced because Steph Curry missed a decent amount of time injured. Per minute, much better. Oh, well, better. I don't want to say much better, but better than Damian Lillard. And, you know, it's a very interesting discussion. I've had a lot of this last week with Damian Lillard versus Curry. It's like Curry's ceiling is better, but Damian Lillard's been more consistent. And irrespective of that, they're both MVP caliber players. And don't worry, your team is never going to have to choose between the two of them. So it's kind of a ridiculous argument to have. But Lillard's great. Yeah, if you've got a team with Lillard, if you have an MVP caliber player on your team, the rest should be easy. So we're not worried about the Blazers. But to your point, I think they're like obviously Melo, McCollum, and maybe one or two other bench players. Right there is substantial work to be done. But the good news is it could pay dividends very quickly and turn this team around. So it's interesting, right? Because in basketball, the Arturo Galletti point is your top 6 players decide your playoff fate. We are definitely doing a glass half empty, glass half full, because I'm basically saying the Blazers have 3 great players, right? So they're fine. And you're saying the Blazers have 3 bad players in their top 6. They need to improve. But we basically agree on the same thing. Keep those 3 good players, get rid of those 3 bad players. You have a contender.
Yeah, that's right.
All right. The good news is most of these other ones will go pretty quick. Utah, Memphis. What I put on the script is just chill. Utah lost the first game to Memphis, and even people I respect, like Arturo Galletti, were like, "Oh, bad coaching, bad this, bad that," and then Utah came back and blew them out in 4. As I mentioned, Gobert played really well. Mitchell looked pretty good. The Jazz have to be the favorites right now to win the playoffs. So chill is all I can say about the playoffs. It's a funny 2-parter where, as an example, we'll see if they came back, Brian, but at least at the half, one of the teams in tonight's game was not doing well. And the rough part about that is that game goes in the books when it's over, and the playoffs is pretty short. So it's like, even if the better team should win, they might not have a chance to catch up. So certainly when a team loses a game, you would hope they win. It's not great, but it still doesn't tell you anything. So the good news about our 3 of our remaining series, let's blow through them. The Utah Jazz versus Memphis. Utah was much better and they won. No shocker. Brooklyn versus Boston. We already kind of mentioned that, but James Harden was amazing. So it is actually rough that he's out probably for the whole next season. But they were just a much better team.
Milwaukee, I didn't hear that. He's out for the distance.
I think because I was mentioning he's out tonight with a hamstring, the same issue that took him out in game 1. And I said, I noted that Milwaukee's got its work cut out for it if James Harden is waiting on the wings to come back. And someone said he's probably out unless the series goes to 7. So here's hoping for 7, I guess.
But he could return later in the playoffs at least.
Oh yeah, so next round if they make it. Milwaukee versus Miami. It shows how much people just get recency bias to like bad beats. Take, for example, Cleveland beating the Golden State Warriors, right? Which wasn't supposed to happen. It was a bad beat. And then the next season, the Warriors were like, yeah, no, that was wrong. Milwaukee destroyed Miami. That's not an indictment against Miami. That was supposed to happen this last season, and it happened this season. So the stupid metaphor I came up with is if like a star employee was 30 minutes late for work and the next day showed up on time, you wouldn't be like, really good job, a ton of improvement from yesterday. You'd be like, that's what I expect out of you. Good.
It was a little bit easier to get to work today than yesterday, though. I would say the Heat were better last year, quite a bit.
I would agree with that. And then, but like I also said, the weird thing about bubble basketball, topic we might have to talk more is, right, the Bucks went from having one of the best home court advantages with one of the top seeds with a bunch of young players that were like playing great together to having some young players that hadn't played for a while. And I mean, I think the veteran mentality of, say, Jimmy Butler and Andre Iguodala probably helped the Heat out substantially. This was a rough one. Jimmy Butler, said he didn't bring his family to the bubble because, it was a business trip, basically. LeBron James said the same. So I think the Heat were just better equipped for bubble basketball than the Bucks. That's nothing against the Bucks, right? The Bucks had no chance to prepare for bubble basketball. No one did. No one knows that. But this year, right, we get back to normal basketball with the Bucks having a better thing with the Heat. Now the Heat, the bubble basketball, a bunch of time off to rest up and get healthy for veterans that are grizzled. Now, right, Jimmy Butler, Andre Iguodala are beat up at the end of the season. And yeah, to your point, the Bucks had a much easier series.
I'd say the Bucks are a little bit better too. They getting Drew Holiday did turn out to be a big upgrade, I think, versus whatever this stage of Eric Bledsoe's career is. He was great earlier. And to answer the criticism of Budenholzer earlier, he has been better this year in the playoffs. I think he's better minutes, more for Giannis and his top guys like Middleton, and a little bit less for Brook Lopez, a little more Bobby Portis instead. So I think there have been some improvements on the margins.
Although this next series, we will see. I don't want to spoil anything, but the Bucks versus the Nets is interesting, and we will see what people say at the end of that. Although Ty Willingham's friend of the show has been crunching the numbers and basically says The Nets look better than the Bucks, although that was with James Harden, so we will see. Um, Philadelphia, Washington went as expected. The only rough part is Embiid has been beat up and injured, and here's hoping he comes back in this round because that will be important.
He did play
And
pretty well in that Hawks loss, and it wasn't clear that he was going to play. So, yeah, here's hoping.
Yep. Last one, and I do want to talk about. So I have two possible articles for this week, Brian. For tomorrow, I'm hoping to get one out. And this one is going to follow the same trend I did with James Wiseman, which is to say, was Kristaps Porzingis a mistake? So the Los Angeles Clippers versus the Dallas Mavericks. Amazing series, right? In that we had
it's the only one that went 7, right? Out of all of them,
it was the only one that went 7. We had 6 home court losses before the Clippers finally won in the end. So ridiculous series. It was kind of funny. You got to flip on yourself, Brian, because last show we recorded, you made a very astute observation. You said the Clippers, people are sleeping on them. You
and
said
the fundamentals are good, right? The numbers.
Their numbers look great. They're the second team in SRS. They have Finals MVP Kawhi Leonard. They have 2 stars between Paul George and Kawhi. They have a pretty strong looking team. You were like, this team looks like a good title shot winner. When it looked like they were, they went down 0-2 to the Mavericks. They bounced back. It was going to game 7. I said, hey, your prognostication might be right. And you said, no, I want the Mavericks to go on now because they're doing it right. They're playing big ball. The issue with the Mavericks playing big ball is that's doing it with Porzingis, and Porzingis has not looked great. And what's funny to me is I was not a fan of the Kristaps Porzingis trade at the time. Those that forget, basically, the Mavericks traded DeAndre Jordan, a decent player with a couple of good years left, although he's been a non-factor in this year's playoffs. He's been benched entirely. They traded a good player in DeAndre Jordan for a player that we had never seen play great. For what it's worth, I think Kristaps Porzingis' peak true shooting had been like 54% in a full season before coming to the Mavericks. And he's a 7-footer that doesn't rebound. So we were questionable. But the bigger thing is Kristaps Porzingis missed an entire season with an ACL injury, and the Mavericks gave him a max extension before he ever suited up a game for them. And that to me is the mistake. The mistake, Kristaps Porzingis is not a good trade, but if you were viewing the following, our coaching staff can improve Kristaps Porzingis. I've gotten in this argument several times with Mark Cuban. I'm not going to get any awards. I'm not going to get any accolades. I'm not going to get any recompense. But for fuck's sake, I'm getting so sick of the Mavericks logic of we're going to take this mediocre player with our amazing coach. Rick Carlisle seems to be a really good coach. He's also a fantastic actor, even if we include like Sonic the Hedgehog. But anyway, Rick Carlisle may be a good coach, but the Mavericks love picking up mediocre players and saying we're going to improve these mediocre players, and then it just doesn't happen. So they picked up Kristaps Porzingis. Maybe he's going to turn great. The mistake was signing him to a long, expensive deal before he was ever healthy, and he's getting upset saying Luka Doncic doesn't respect him. And I'm upset with the Mavericks in like the same way I'm upset with the Bucks, which is going, they have a generational talent, an MVP caliber talent. Shocking part about Kristaps Porzingis, he's not an amazing scorer. He's like 58% true shooting, which isn't horrible. Like his 3-point shooting efficiency is really bad. People are comparing him and Kevin Durant to each other. No, they are light years apart in terms of shooting efficiency. But he is an amazing player. And the Mavericks have not put a great team around him, including Kristaps Porzingis. Another weird thing, right, is didn't they let Seth Curry walk for nothing this season? And he's been playing pretty well.
Now, they traded him to the 76ers for not Darrell Wright. He's retired, a different Wright? Or...
Jason, I thought.
Oh, Jason Richardson.
That could be right.
Jason
that
Richardson.
Was weird
different
move.
Philadelphia guy.
But is what it is. So the Mavericks, I think the story of that game is here's hoping playoff Paul George isn't a thing. The Clippers looked a little off, and Luka Doncic was amazing. But the reality is, at the end of the day, the better team that was supposed to win won. And it is frustrating to watch the Mavericks and go exact same scenario as the Portland Trailblazers. Put a couple of good pieces around Luka Doncic, and you're a contender. Hell, you still had a chance this year and last year. It is just frustrating to watch teams make stupid mistakes like this.
No, I mean, I was just happy that Carlisle was like, screw it, we're going to throw away the regular season rotations in defense. We're going to put Boban as a starter and play a zone defense. It was so much fun to watch, and they actually won a little bit with it and played a close series. But this is the real point is, yeah, if only they didn't have that big Porzingis, salary hanging over them, they could have played, I don't know, Boban and Dwight Powell instead. Maybe in the front court it would have been a little bit better.
And they kept benching Dwight Powell, and he's amazing, which is
yeah, they didn't play Dwight Powell at all, which was weird. And they also didn't play Jalen Brunson at all, and he's really good. They played more Tim Hardaway Jr. Brunson got a little in there in Game 7, I think, but basically didn't play very many minutes. So, yeah, I don't know. So Carlisle giveth and taketh away, I suppose.
I was going to say the following. I was hoping for predictions out of us, but given that some of the series have started, some games are in progress that we may not want to spoil for us, I'm just going to leave that alone. We'll revisit. I'm ready for shout outs, Brian, if you don't have any other topics.
No, I mean, I guess that's it. I still like the Nets, even without Harden, as crazy as that sounds. Irving was just playing shooting guard, and then all of a sudden he's like, oh, I guess I'll go back to playing point guard, and got a bunch of assists. So, yeah, the Nets look pretty good. We'll see if they can get past the Bucks and whoever else. And then otherwise in the West, yeah, the West looks a lot more wide open. The top 4 teams are all still alive, and they all are really good teams. So, yeah, it's tough to say.
The good news I've heard, right, people noting is I think the most recent team of the bunch of remaining to win a title is the 76ers in the 80s. That's like Dr. J. Ainge.
That's right.
So it is great that we're going to get like a novel team winning a title. I am rooting for a Nets Nuggets finals, right? Because that is a repeat of the last ABA finals. That would be amazing. As I mentioned, my top 3 teams: Nuggets, Nets, Suns, just in terms of like combination of players and franchises I would love to see win, right? It would be really interesting to see a Suns Nets playoffs, right? Because you have the Suns who could never win due to bad luck, a ton of bad luck, right? Just dropped his name, but a star guard that ended up going to the Hawks, got his face broken in the playoffs. Amari Stoudemire got injured. Then Amari Stoudemire jumped off the bench and got suspended, right? Just a ton of bad lucks for that franchise. So, the Suns winning a title would be great, but then if they're doing it against Steve Nash, who also never won a title, you're like, who do I root for? But that would be a fun finals as well. So I have teams I'm definitely rooting for. As I've mentioned, I'm petty. Only team I'm not rooting for is the 76ers. That's the only one.
Well, I'll root for the 76ers then because I like Ben Simmons. So
Ben Simmons is really good. I'll give you that. All right. I got a couple shout outs. I was going to maybe talk a little more about this, but we'll save it. We've learned this from past, right, Brian? They're off-season topics. So Naomi Osaka, if I want to get the name right, withdrew from the French Open basically because she was saying she didn't want to speak to reporters over anxiety and mental issues, and got fined. And she basically said, "Fuck this." And I give full applause to her for that. The note I made is at a given time, there are a handful of people that can win a Grand Slam in tennis. And, she has won the US Open super young, right? She beat Roger Federer, and that she beat Serena Williams at a super young age to win the US Open.
And she's only 23 now, I think. So, yeah.
Ridiculous. And Roger Federer, he didn't end up winning the Wimbledon, but he defeated Pete Sampras. Pete Sampras is the last chance to win a record, I believe, 9th Wimbledon at the time. So very similar. There's a handful of players that good at tennis. Whereas I think reporting, even though I give it respect, is a much easier job with a lot of people that can do it. So the kind of belief that players need to give access to reporters, it's rough, right? Because I agree that part of the sport, we've said this about coaches and stuff, right? Part of the sport is media attention, but also you said the paternalism and entitlement. I think you were saying that pre-show on the show. The paternalism and entitlement always weirds us out. So it's not that they say, hey, we demand access to you. It's when they say, hey, after that rough loss, we really need you to get in front of a room of these reporters that ask these questions. It's fucking why, right?
They also just subtweeted her, right? They just went out and said, look at all these other people doing their job and you aren't, basically. So, yeah, it was a total power play.
And you could also say how many of those people can win a Grand Slam, because that's the other thing, right? Is it's
That's what
rare, right?
Venus Williams said.
Oh, that was great. She said, yeah, she said that's the way she gets through it, is knowing that no one will ever be on her level, which is a great response. But at the same time, it's also frustrating to go, why should people have to talk? And then it's also, by the way, let's note the funny absurdity. When you ask a professional athlete questions like these, and I'm not talking about Naomi, I'm talking about other ones, she just got fined and in trouble for doing that. So all of these athletes are, of course, going to tiptoe the line and still side, and that's always rough to watch. So do give her full respect and hope that there are some changes. I think I saw an organization said they're willing to just pay the fines. And by the way, from a creative marketing standpoint, an organization saying we're going to pay the fines for an athlete not to talk is an amazing ploy, right? You can say, much like Naomi, we let our play do the talking. We don't need expensive press conferences or whatever. It's interesting. I've been on a tennis kick and watching like old clips of John McEnroe, and he was actually saying that Phil Knight of Nike was telling him in his bad boy days to keep it up, and was using that as like as advertising. I guess one thing he did is McEnroe would break his rackets, but he wore Nike shoes. And so what they would do is they would say Nike shoes are stronger than whatever the brand of racket he was using, and then use a clip. So it's like there is some clever marketing to be had, and I think it's fine to go that way, and we'll see. It's more of a shout out to a fun topic. Another one I finally started
I have my
watching.
shout out on the same topic, actually.
Let's go for it.
So no, I've been trying to, reconcile that too, which is, I have said in the past, well, look, it is part of your job as a professional athlete to talk to the media, right? That's why you're paid. But at the same time, anyone who followed this Osaka situation, clearly, I think she was in the right. You have to, as Marshawn Lynch would say, you have to take care of your chicken and you have to take care of your mentals, right? So got to take care of your mentals. But I guess the best comment I heard to reconcile that was from Jamel Hill, who, has been, of course, very outspoken about social issues lately, but also works as a journalist. And so she has a good perspective on it. And what she said is basically the whole, well, first of all, she said, yes, those, the tennis players are uncomfortable in those type of situations, but the journalists are too. And the reason for that is professional tennis just does not handle their press availability very well. It's the way the system is set up that kind of pits the athletes against the journalists. And if they were to do something like have a press pool like the White House does, that could solve the problem. So there are ways, kind of procedurally and process to solve this issue. And I thought that was a good take.
I like, and I mean, I think with a lot of things is, I think when you try and make broad sweeping rules, I'm going to go back to Mark Eaton, where I was kind of saying Mark Eaton was even starting to fall apart from some of like the generic rules I would want for my Hall of Fame, is you kind of start looking at context. And I think with like any workplace, that's what good workplaces should try and do, this to get on kind of like a topical issue, right? We're at the end of the COVID pandemic in the United States, at least. The rest of the world, it's messed up, Brian. But anyway, United States, right? If you want to get vaccinated in the U.S., you can get vaccinated. We're getting over half the adults vaccinated. It's great. There's still some direness on people who don't want to get vaccinated, but from where we were at the start of the year, I'm so optimistic and happy with where we have gotten. I'll say it that way. But a lot of businesses that went remote for the COVID vaccine are now having to reconcile with trying to go back to business as usual, and having people say, I liked work from home, or Apple is going through this right now, where they basically said, you all have to come back in the office 3 days a week. And some employers are saying no. Good employers should find a way to work around talented employees such that they both get what they want. One of the books that we always promote on the show is The Alliance by Chris Ye and Reid Hoffman and Ben Casnocha. And that's kind of noting it, is kind of trying to make sure that the employer and employee understand each other and get an agreement in place, get an alliance where they both get what they want and are happy. And it's when you try and make a cookie cutter thing, right, where you basically say, we want 9 to 5 and we expect you to we expect you to be family at this company and last here 40 years, where things fall apart when expectations get out of whack with reality. So I think, the I'm just here so I don't get fined from Marshawn Lynch, I think it is fine for professional athletic companies like how did I just drop the name of the professional tennis organization? But the pro tennis organization that handles both men and women tennis to basically just go, some of our athletes might have issues with the press pool, and the way we'll make their availability is different, and we'll work around that. And if you've got, as I said it like 10 times now, right, a Grand Slam caliber, you just said 23-year-old, that's your brand, that's your future, man. Like, work around that. Find a way to work around that, right? Let her work remote. Let her call into work 2 days a week or whatever, right? Brian, you don't want to lose her for nothing. And like I said, in the COVID pandemic, we're seeing, I'm starting to see articles about that. There are companies that are trying to remain stringent and adherent and saying going back to business as normal are going to lose employees over that.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I'm seeing in the business world is more people, like you said, wanting to compromise and doing more of a hybrid model. Maybe every once in a while, a couple days a week, you're going to come in and have face-to-face meetings. That's valuable, for innovation and whatnot. But then the other days, yeah, we don't want to waste office space. We don't want to make people commute, which wastes time. And, we want to let people be comfortable and not have everyone tapping them on the shoulder all the time. So, yeah, I mean, that's the way to figure things out, for sure.
And then, I mean, we didn't even touch like the mental health aspect of that, as you know, that there are lots of differing people across a spectrum of things. And that as the term that started getting used, in neurology, right, of like spectrum of people, where some people handle in-person better than others, and starting to kind of adjust for those people and saying, how do we make a workspace that accommodates lots of different people that now can all bring their skills? That is ideal.
I mean, Roland Garros just miscalculated where the power was. They're like, we're the major. We've been around for, I don't know, 100 years or whatever. You're gonna do what you're told. And Osaka and her team were like, no. Like you said, I'm the 23-year-old biggest star. I don't need you this tournament, Roland Garros.
And I mean, we always bring up on this show the concept of, making a rival league to the NBA. And I've said that logistically is very, very hard to do. The irony, right, is you could, right, if they wanted to, this would be hilarious. I'm sure they have contractual reasons they could not do this. If Nadal and Federer said, hey, we're not going to play at the French Open, we're just going to play a best of 7 on clay against each other and pit it against your, center court games, like, it would draw better, right? Like the talent in tennis, that's what's rough, right? Is tennis is an individual sport, best of 64 or 32, right? I think is how the normal seedings work out. The top 5 tennis players, right, could dictate the ratings. So there's a lot more power at the top of tennis than even, I mean, we would argue LeBron James is probably more valuable on his own than even say like Serena, just by lieu of the sport or whatever, with a number of people and stuff like that. Actually, probably not. No, it's still Serena. Never mind. I take that back. But anyway, just the point is, like, tennis is where, yeah, the top 2 or 3 stars could literally change things. That happened in chess, by the way. Gary Kasparov and Nigel Short, 2 of the top chess players, got upset with FIDE and broke with them, and it actually forced FIDE to change their rules. So the same kind of thing could happen in tennis.
Let's be dialectic though. I'll put the the reverse in there. Look what happened to the Super League. The top teams tried to, break off and do their own thing and ditch all the lesser teams, but then it just backfired. They realized, we actually need all these other teams to.
Was this soccer?
Yes.
But again, the pushback I'll give you there is soccer and baseball are 2 sports that it is really, 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 really hard for one person to be worth so much. Because I think that how
individual
many
sport versus team, you're saying.
How many teams went into the super team? I did read a little bit about it failing, but how many went in to do that?
I don't think it was finalized yet. There was a group of teams that were going to go in that were the main teams, and then it quickly started unraveling.
But I mean, I think it's really hard. I mean, even NBA, right? My point about a rival league is like, even the ABA wasn't able to take down the NBA, and that was like 8 or 9 teams when the NBA had like 16. So it's like you would need like 10 to 15 NBA teams. That's really hard. And soccer gets much harder, right, with relegation. By the way, thank you. You're leading into my last shout out. I'm catching up a little on soccer because I'm watching Ted Lasso. I not all the way through it. Good news though is you haven't even started it, Brian, so no worries about spoilers. But one spoiler I will give, one amazing shout out I have to give it is they have an homage to Allen Iverson's practice in the middle of the show and it is genius. And I was rolling when my wife and I were watching it, and someone made a super cut of it. It's just great. And so Ted Lasso is amazing. I'm not shocked. Ted Lasso is made by Bill Lawrence, who made let's see, Spin City, Scrubs, Cougar Town, I think one other show. An amazing showrunner. Um, and some just Sudeikis is a great talent as well, the lead of the show. I'm not shocked. It is a great mix, I would say, of Major League, Rocky, and the movie Eddie, which I'm starting to wonder if maybe that movie is better than I thought, because though you said it's based on a true story, right? The American coach going to coach in Europe, so who knows.
Ted Lasso, yeah.
Yeah, but it's a great show. And like I said, my 2 cents though is the Allen Iverson practice rant showing up in the middle of the show. Chef's kiss.
My shout is also to Allen Iverson.
He always deserves. Last one, I'll include a link in the show notes. Dave Barry gave a talk on college basketball scouting, essentially. He's done an update from some of the studies you've seen in Wages of Wins and Stumbling on Wins. Great talk, a lot of fascinating stuff we'll talk in the future. I'm leaving it on the cutting room floor because we went long to rightfully talk the playoffs, Brian. So anyway, that has been the show. I think we got through everything. Anything you want to end up on? Otherwise, I'll head us out.
Nope, let's go watch some playoffs.
All right, here's hoping the Nuggets. I'm jinxing us, Brian, because the last couple of shows we missed so you could watch the Nuggets. I'm taking us into halftime now, so hopefully you watching just the half of the Nuggets is still enough for them to win.
Oh, no,
and you said you're going to watch DVR, so
yeah.
not live, so we'll see. All right, anyway, that's been our show. If you found us not through the website, you can find us at boxscoregeeks.com. I've been your host, Dre Alvarez, found most places as Nerd Numbers. Co-host of the show, Brian Foster, also producer, found most places as Boxscore Brian. You can find us twitch.tv/Nerd Numbers. We usually go live 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Went a little early this week to try and catch the playoffs. Here's hoping there's still time. Recaps of the show on channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube, and you can find us on iTunes and Stitcher and most places where podcasts are found as the Boxscore Geek Show. Hope your team wins in the playoffs, or at least they're still in the playoffs. If not, have a good one.